Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for listening. What I want to talk to you today about is research for responsible and sustainable mineral exploration and production. Whoops. Let me just see here. There we go. So first, to explain what ICRAG is, where I'm from, I'm the director of the IRIS Center for Research in Applied Geosciences, and that is composed of 60 academics and 90 researchers, PhDs and postdocs, at 8 universities and research institutes across Ireland. We work with over 60 industry partners and with 5 state policy partners as well. So it's a large group, diverse in different places. The aims of ICRAG are to sustainably unlock natural resources. That includes obviously raw materials, the subject of this conference, but we also look at energy and water, both of which obviously also go into unlocking raw materials. We also look at Earth system change and how we get towards decarbonization going to the future. And finally, we have an aim to educate and improve understanding of geosciences, geohazards, and risk perception among various publics, as you'll see. So mineral exploration really has to be responsible both inwards, across the sector, so within the industry, if you will, but also outwards as well. And so at ICRAG, we're trying to actually look both inwards and outwards. Let me start with the inwards. In that area, we're looking at exploration techniques and technologies that are environmentally friendly, and societally acceptable, and based on what's happening with COVID around the world, hopefully probably in the near term at least generate a lot of jobs, because we're going to need to have much more job creation in the next couple of years. So I'm putting up here a slide originally from Richard Schodde, and what it shows is through time from the 1950s to the present, sort of the evolution of mineral exploration technologies, with geophysics on the bottom, followed by geochemistry, then geology in the middle, drilling and enabling technologies at the top. And we're clearly at ICRAG working on data from a number of these technologies to try and actually make them work better. So for instance, getting the most out of existing data sets, such as the Rathdowney trend on the left, using thousands and thousands of boreholes, geology, geochemistry, to create 3-dimensional models of geologic spaces. In Ireland, we're lucky we have large amounts of seismic data in the last decade, and so using that data to create 2D surfaces and 3D volumes, both of ore deposits and increasingly actually of the entire central Midlands of the country. Also trying to get the most from existing data sets in terms of geochemistry, using a series of analytical tools to look at things like trace elements, to generate vectors to ore, or based on the last talk actually, to fingerprint minerals and try and see if we can tell where different things come from in the world. As well as actually working with sort of the existing technologies, ICRAG is also trying to work with developing new ones. So I've highlighted here in red some of the ones we're actually working on. Down in the geophysics, looking at 3D seismics, 3D inversions, and developing new ways of looking at passive seismic. In the geochemistry, using a whole series of different tools, but primarily in the laser ablation ICP-MS space and mobile XRF, again, trying to figure out better ways to actually have those technologies do more for us. In the geology sector, we're, I hope, leaders in mineral systems, putting together new ways of looking for deposits, or in fact, whole new kinds of deposits, like new types of cobalt deposits that no one's ever thought of. And in the enabling technologies, 3D software, but one that Richard didn't even have on his list, which is machine learning, which I think will be actually critical going forward in the future. So a couple of these, just to quickly go through them. Passive seismic is one I'm very keen on. Seismic itself works great. Passive, there's plenty of energy in many parts of the world to actually get a signal. This data is from the Navan deposit. We're actually also working in Canada at the moment. The idea to do this is obviously, one, hopefully it'll save money, but two, it's a lot more societally easy to get this permitted, because basically you don't have a big truck rolling through and thumping the ground. You just have these little cans that have to sit out there for a couple of months. So most people think that's a better way to do it. Developing new mineral systems. One of the places we've been working on the last couple of years, Central Africa, trying to look for how the world's biggest sedimentary copper and the world's largest cobalt district, actually, how did it form? Can we figure out ways to go look for another one, or at least other pieces of this one? Then we turn outwards. So the other is sort of the lanes we normally think of, the high-end analytical, geophysical, geological. But it's really important to actually think about where we work. So in ICRAG, we're also working to understand the concerns of different publics at all sorts of scales, from the national to the state or county, the local community, NGOs, et cetera, to try and educate publics about actual risks and benefits of mineral production, but also to educate ourselves and take cognizance of social, environmental, and climate justice issues. And for those of you who see the background, that is Ireland. So we have social justice issues here in Ireland, as well as many of you do in other parts of the world. So how do we do that? Well, part of it's actually understanding ourselves and how we're perceived. This is a really simple experiment, but actually was really enlightening for a lot of people. We had people just draw sketches of a mine. What do they thought of when they think of mining or quarrying? So you can see the geoscientist has a nice little sketch there of a plant, an underground operation, and a fault, and some protesters, as it turns out. And the non-geoscientist has this hole with a piece of equipment, a whole bunch of things on the side which say rubbish, mess, animals are unhappy, etc., ruins the scenery. I think that gets across really very simply the dichotomy between different groups thinking about what we do. Whoops, just a second. Whoops, let me go back. So we're trying to actually bring people together and understand that in different ways. This was part of a summer school that was operated last year. It was funded by a number of companies from the mining industry, as well as UNESCO, sort of an interesting group of funders. And it brought together both social scientists and geoscientists interested in natural resources and raw materials from around the world, from 37 different countries, along with several experts in both geoscience and geoscience to work with them for a week in a series of workshops. And incredibly successful, and to be honest, a lot of fun as well. As you can see, we even had one nice day where we got in the field. One thing I'd bring up is just for interest. Last week, there was another conference, the EGU's Managing Our Mineral Resources for a Sustainable Future. And they actually had surveys at the beginning and end of that particular session. And I put up the results here. They're actually quite similar. But what's interesting, the question was, what should be the most important factor in deciding to approve a mining project? And approximately 50% in both surveys said it was environmental and ecosystem impact. And then second most was, in many cases, social license. That was about 15%. Geoscience data was next. Actual security of supply and benefits, economic or community benefits, were low. I think that's really interesting. And I wonder if the survey was done 3-4 months from now, if we'd actually have the same results. And that's something we should try and do, actually, to see. So one of the things to look at, I'm going to switch gears here a bit and touch on some themes that were touched on earlier this afternoon, actually. This is the known mineral endowment of the planet, again from Richard Schodde. And what we're seeing here is a blow up of Europe. And as you can see, there's a lot of mines there, right? There's a lot of deposits in Europe. And in fact, if we look historically, back in the mid-1800s, Europe was actually the mineral powerhouse of the world, right? It's where most of the world's metals actually came from. Now, today, obviously, you can see that we're right down at the bottom. Europe is literally the bottom of the barrel in terms of what we produce. And if we look at the significant discoveries since 1999, again, not many in Europe. Some in the periphery in Ireland, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, but many fewer than other parts of the world. Nonetheless, Europe uses a lot of materials, and most of it is imported. And many people have seen this EU chart. You can see basically the entire thing there is imported. Even zinc and copper, really, really common metals, we import more than 50% of those. So one of my questions is, we talk a lot in the last couple of months about curves flattening and unflattening. And I wonder going forward, as we look at supply chains and think about secure supply chains for all sorts of things, from ventilators to masks, maybe Europe will want to unflatten this curve and actually have it pull up so we can supply more of the materials we need internally. And I suspect other parts of the world will want to do the same. So I would expect to see sort of mineral nationalism come back throughout the world. If so, every place that does that, they really do need to think about responsible mineral exploration, production, and closure. What this conference is all about, right? So what this conference is all about to me is really essential and really timely, because I think the world is going to be thinking more about where we source our raw materials as we go forward. So that also brings us to the circular economy. Most of what I think about is commonly in the first part, but in reality, of course, there's waste all through. And all the wastes are actually just a material that we can treat just like the stuff that comes out of a mine. So we can use the same tools. Using the existing technologies we have, doing analytics or geophysics, to look at urban waste mining, right? How do I actually understand what's in a landfill? Geophysically, I'm probably going to do it, and also I'm going to take boreholes, and I'm going to do geochemistry to try and understand that. And so we're working on that aspect as well. So in conclusion, scientific and social research into more economic, more sustainable, more acceptable methods of mineral exploration, production, and closure is required for responsible mineral exploration and mining. But one of the things I think that is important to note going forward, traditionally much of this in academia, at least in the North American sense, and even certainly here in Ireland, a lot of it's been funded by industry. Going forward, I think it's going to have to be a joint project between industry and government. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, absolutely fantastic, Murray, as always. And yes, you can imagine that fantastic applause ringing around the world for you as a whole. As the questions come through, Murray, if I can go back to that poll that you showed from EGU, so the EGU conference last week, and just to, I guess, just to explain to everybody, so this conference is primarily attended by geoscientists. It is a European conference, but of course people do attend from around the world. And I'm acutely aware that there are lots of people on the conference here today who have more to do with EGU than I do myself. But this poll I find fascinating because the data that you see coming through here, I was part of a webinar last week that was probably being held at a very similar time to EGU, and it was actually with the American Markets Intelligence Group. And the majority of people on that call were from the Americas, so be it North America or South America. And we got a very, very different picture coming back from that poll.
What was it? What was the picture you saw?
So the picture that we saw put communities being the most important factor. So I was just wondering, Murray, from your perspective, do you think that the differences in the results from this poll coming back are either due to the differences in the context between Europe and, say, Latin America, and do you think it's because we're actually interpreting what those words mean and the scope of those different areas in a different way? What do you think?
Both. So I think, no, there's elements of both in it. So clearly the experience in the Americas, where I've come from, is we are very, very aware of the community issues because they've influenced so many projects. And so we're aware of it both at the industry side and the NGO side and the government side, right? Here in Europe, where there hasn't been as much mining for quite a while, to be honest, or it's in very mining specific locations, I don't think social license has been as big an issue because it hasn't had to be, right? So here it's environmental. That's what people are thinking about. My job before this was actually at USGS in Washington. And if I would have polled people, say in the Washington area, government area, I would have got a different response too. It would have been security of supply. everybody was completely paranoid about rare earths coming from one particular country. So I think it depends on your audience, one. It depends on what's in the news, two. And that's one reason why I wanted to say that I think doing a survey like this in different places and at different times, it would be very interesting to see how things are changing, public perception, because the perception is not static.
So I guess building on that, Murray, and I almost cringe to look at YouTube now with regards to the comments that might be coming through, because we've got some really active participants there who are very passionate, quite rightly so, with regards to the community aspects around mining in Europe. And the use of land. Do you see the priorities within Europe, do you think they'll change, or do you think that it will stay as being environmental concerns and issues being top of that tree?
Well, if they really are top of that tree, then we should be doing much more mining in Europe. Because if you actually really want to decarbonize the planet, then you want to actually reduce total CO2 emissions, which means I want to reduce the transport of materials around the world, which means I want to produce materials as close as I can to where they're actually used. So if you really, really are environmentalists, you want mining in your backyard, but you want it done right. And that's the other reason to do it in Europe. Europe has some of the toughest regulations on the planet. And so I actually think mining should be done where the regulations are the toughest. So this is ironic, but I think if you're really environmentalist, you need to work on what mining can be done. How can it be done the very best? We should be mining only the best quality deposits in the best places in the world to do that, right?
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Murray. And again, just to share with everybody who's maybe not able to see the Zoom chat, Nicholas has very kindly shared with us perhaps one of the differences between those two polls, with the composition of the EGU conference having many, many climate scientists. So of course we would anticipate environment to go further up that poll, which is of course one of those problems whenever you poll an audience, because you will always get trends in that data.